The courtroom is a cathedral of cold marble and heavy silence, smelling of floor wax and impending doom. Sarah Mitchell stands at the center, a ghost of a woman with hollowed eyes and bruising that mirrors the shadows of her past. Her oversized, stained clothes mask the elite warrior she once was, while the prosecutor paints her as a violent drifter who finally snapped. The tension peaks not with a shout, but with a simple movement. As Sarah reaches for the microphone, her sleeve pulls back to reveal an intricate, weathered military insignia tattooed on her forearm. In that moment, the sterile machinery of the law grinds to a halt as Judge Thornton's gaze locks onto the ink, his face draining of color as he recognizes the mark of the woman who brought his only child home alive. Before we continue, welcome to Brittany Stories. This is a home of powerful, emotional, and unforgettable stories, filled with drama, secrets, unexpected twists, and life-changing moments. Each story is crafted to entertain, inspire, and keep you thinking long after the video ends. If you love shocking reveals, hidden identities, billionaire secrets, and stories that touch the heart, you're in the right place. Like our videos, if they move you, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. The courtroom was a cathedral of cold marble, smelling of floor wax and impending doom. Judge Robert Thornton sat atop his bench, a man whose reputation for rigid adherence to the law was as unyielding as the wood he sat upon. Below him stood the bridge killer, a woman the prosecutor described as a violent drifter who had finally snapped. Sarah Mitchell was a ghost of a woman, her clothes oversized and stained, her eyes hollowed by shadows that mirrored a dark past. Thornton looked down at the defendant with clinical distance, seeing only another docket number in a system that had stopped believing in salvation. But as the charges of murder were read in a monotone drone, the atmosphere shifted. Sarah reached for the microphone to address her counsel, and her sleeve pulled back. Thornton's gavel stayed midair. There, etched into her weathered skin, was an intricate military insignia. The judge's face drained of color. He didn't see a criminal. He saw a mark he hadn't glimpsed in 15 years, the emblem of the woman who had pulled his only son from the wreckage of an Afghan mountain pass. "This court will take an immediate recess," Thornton announced, his voice stripped of its usual judicial distance. In the privacy of his chambers, the air was thick with a different kind of tension. Sarah sat across from him, swaying slightly but with a spine straightened by muscle memory. Thornton didn't look at her through the lens of the law. He looked at her as a father who owed a debt he could never repay. "Commander Mitchell," he said quietly, using a title she hadn't heard in years. Sarah's eyes filled with tears at the recognition. He reached out, his hand trembling as he gestured toward the tattoo. He told her of his son, the boy she had carried through enemy fire when everyone else had given up. Sarah whispered that she had tried to be that person again, but the warrior had died in the desert. Thornton shook his head, his jaw clenching with emotion. He realized then that the system hadn't just failed a citizen. It had discarded a hero. The silent code of the Brotherhood was invoked. He would not let her fall again. As the trial resumed, the defense took a sharp, aggressive turn. Martinez, Sarah's public defender, had been energized by the judge's sudden interest. They began digging into the ironclad evidence presented by the prosecution. It didn't take long for the cracks to appear. The primary witnesses against Sarah were contractors for a powerful private military firm she had investigated during her final tour of duty. The bridge killer narrative began to unravel like a frayed rope. Fingerprint evidence was shown to be inconsistent, and security footage from the night of the murder appeared digitally altered. Sarah sat at the table, her hand steady for the first time as the truth began to emerge. The firm had framed her to ensure their own war crimes remained buried in the sand of a foreign land. They had targeted her because they thought a homeless woman with a damaged memory would be an easy scapegoat. They underestimated the bond of the uniform and the sharp eyes of a judge who remembered the taste of mountain dust. To establish the motive behind the frame-up, Sarah had to do the one thing she feared most: remember. Taking the stand, her voice was hoarse but clear as she recounted the mission that had broken her. She spoke of the IED that had claimed her team and the smoke and screaming of that final extraction. The courtroom was silent as she described the classified files she had uncovered, proof of illegal executions by the very firm now accusing her of murder. She detailed the descent that followed the trauma, the severe PTSD, the the traumatic brain injury that made dates and times slip through her mind like water. She spoke of the marriage that crumbled and the rent she couldn't pay until the bridge became her only home. The jury didn't see a killer. They saw a woman who had sacrificed her soul for her country and been repaid with neglect. Judge Thornton listened with a pained expression, his heart breaking for the invincible warrior who had become a ghost. The fire of her memory was painful, but it was the only light that could burn through the lies. The revelations did not go unnoticed by those in power. As Thornton pushed for a deeper investigation into the private military firm, the shadows began to push back. Anonymous threats arrived at his home, and whispers of a career-ending scandal began to circulate in the legal community. The firm's lawyers filed motions to suppress Sarah's testimony, citing national security and her unstable mental state. The tension in the courthouse was palpable, with black SUVs idling at the curb and grim-faced men in suits watching every entrance. Thornton was warned by his peers that his unprecedented involvement would be debated by legal scholars for decades. But the judge was no longer a bureaucrat. He was a Marine Corps veteran who had seen men carried off battlefields. He knew that this was a debt of honor, and he refused to be intimidated by specialists or bureaucrats. He cleared his throat, composed himself, and ordered the trial to proceed, ignoring the warnings that he was walking into a professional graveyard. In a moment that would later be described as a landmark in judicial history, Judge Thornton did the unthinkable. Recognizing that his personal connection to the defendant created a conflict of interest, he stepped down from the bench. However, he didn't leave the room. He walked to the witness stand to testify as a character witness for Sarah Mitchell. He spoke with the authority of someone who had walked through similar darkness. "I am not here as a judge, but as a father," he declared to the shocked courtroom. He testified about the classified extraction, describing Sarah's bravery in detail that the private firm had tried to redact. He looked directly at the jury and told them that the woman before them was incapable of the senseless violence she was accused of. His testimony stripped away the judicial distance and forced everyone to see the human cost of the system's failure. By sacrificing a seat of power, he gave Sarah back her voice, proving that honor was more important than any title or docket number. Inspired by Thornton's sacrifice, Sarah Mitchell underwent a transformation. The sway in her posture vanished, replaced by the rigid spine of a commander. When she faced her accusers for cross-examination, she didn't look like a victim. She looked like a hunter. With surgical precision, she pointed out the flaws in prosecution's timeline, using the same tactical mind that had once navigated SEAL Team 3 through enemy territory. She confronted the firm's lead investigator, her eyes locking onto his with ferocity that made him stammer. The courtroom erupted in whispers as she presented a hidden digital backup of the evidence she had preserved before her life fell apart. The nightmares that had plagued her for years finally found a target, and she channeled her pain into a clear, devastating narrative of truth. By the time she finished, the bridge killer was gone, and the commander had returned. The conspiracy was laid bare, the lies dismantled by the very woman they thought was too broken to fight back. The jury returned a verdict of not guilty on all counts within 2 hours. But for Sarah, the real battle was just beginning. Thornton didn't just walk away once the gavel fell. He spent the next 6 months ensuring she didn't slip back into the shadows. He called in every favor to get her into a specialized PTSD and TBI program that focused on female veterans. He visited her monthly, bringing groceries and refusing to let her give up when the memories became too heavy. Sarah moved into a small apartment with actual furniture, her hands finally steadying as she started medication that actually worked. She connected with other veterans who understood that broken things don't always return to their original shape, but they can be rebuilt into something new. She began to carry both her warrior status and her wounds with equal dignity. The bridge was no longer her home. She had a roof, a support system, and a purpose. She was no longer a ghost. She was a survivor in the process of becoming a leader. On Veterans Day, a ceremony was held to honor those who had served in silence. Sarah Mitchell stood beside Judge Thornton, no longer invisible and no longer forgotten. When they called her name, she walked forward, her head held high, the crowd standing in a silence of profound respect rather than judgment. She was presented with a commendation for her service, but the true reward was a clear look in her eyes. She had learned that she wasn't the person who died in the desert, but a woman who had survived it and come back to tell the tale. As she looked out the audience, she saw other veterans who were still lost under their own bridges, and she knew her new mission was to find them. Thornton placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of a debt finally settled. For the first time since the war began, Sarah Mitchell felt like she had finally come home, not just to a house, but to herself. Sarah Mitchell's journey from the shadows of a bridge to the light of the witness stand reminds us that the greatest casualties of war are often the ones we cannot see. Her victory wasn't just a legal exoneration. It was a reclaiming of a soul that the system had deemed lost. In the end, it took the courage of the judge to look past the docket number and see the hero underneath, proving that honor is a bond that never expires. Sarah no longer walks alone. She carries her scars not as signs of shame, but as medals of a war she finally won at home. Let's talk in the comments. I want to hear from you. This story touches on themes of loyalty, hidden past, and the way we treat our heroes. The turning point. If you were in Judge Thornton's position, would you have risked your entire career and reputation to save someone from your past? The power of recognition. Do you believe people can truly come home from trauma, or are we always permanently changed by our darkest moments? The system. What do you think is the biggest hurdle veterans face when returned to civilian life? Join the community. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Brittany's Stories. Every subscription helps us bring more powerful, heart-wrenching, and inspiring narratives to life. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a chapter of our latest deep dives into human spirit.